Hi, Carrie Smart, local architect. I'm here to welcome you today to a panel discussion that's brought to you by the local Victoria network of the RAIC. And I would like to introduce you to the second of two panels on climate change. In our first panel, we talked about the narrative of the impacts of climate change. This panel will be going into discussions of what architects are currently doing to combat the realities of climate change. The question remains, how can we solve the problem? This panel is composed of experienced and well-regarded architectural professionals from Victoria and Vancouver communities and shows illustrated examples. Moderated by local architect Andy Geiry, the discussion will cover important topics and ideas and is followed by a question and answer period. We would like to thank the panelists who volunteered for this discussion. The four panelists are Daryl Condon, architect AIBC, Hughes Condon Marler Architects, in a firm long prominent for innovative design and anticipation of future trends. Chris Rowe, architect AIBC, Low Hammond Rowe Architects, in a firm in Victoria well known for diverse design, institutional projects, and creative site planning. Will King, architect AIBC, Waymark Architects, and a younger Victoria firm recognized for new work incorporating Passive House standards and other current initiatives. Terence Williams, architect AIBC, Terence Williams Architect, a longtime practitioner of sustainability measures in building design and in urban and campus planning, assisted by Chris Gower, architect AIBC. Now on with the session.
Opening up sustainability is the topic. What have architects done? I think we started to make some early headway. Terry and I have had a number of interesting projects that kind of got a toe in sustainability issues. So we thought we'd run through these kind of historic projects, which I think still have terrific value.
So we're talking about climate change in this instance, but we need to go back one and talk about sustainability. And this is the United Nations quote, development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And there are many variations on that theme, but that at least gives us a base. What we will be doing will be to talk about projects that Chris and I have been involved with. So in this instance, this is going back to 1986 and showing a project that John Wade was responsible for, which basically was talking about a dynamic solar control with deciduous planting and daylighting.
Yes, so one of our big forums for our projects was at UVic, where Terry was commissioned to work on the campus planning for a new complex for the engineering faculty, the new department at the university. And we did the general site planning and then a series of buildings through the 90s. And they were very much attuned to sustainability and energy performance issues.
The second one, the first building in that complex was the Petch building. And then the second one was the engineering office wing. And this building was a quadruple glazing system, a 4-element system, curtain wall, vision wall at the time. We tried to tell the client that in this instance, perimeter heating would not be used, but or necessary. Bless his cotton socks, he didn't agree with that, so they installed a heating system. And then once the building was up, we proved that the perimeter heating system was redundant.
So the next project was the engineering lab wing, much more elaborate. A lot of interest again in natural light, high performance window system, again, minimize the amount of mechanical and the energy cost around the building. Natural light was reflected deep into the building. It had all sorts of measures to increase energy efficiency and sustainability. Sustainability also relates to the lifespan of buildings. These buildings are all designed for a 50-year plus lifespan, which I think is critical in architecture in terms of contributing to a sustainable future.
So in 1995, this was deemed to be the most energy efficient building in BC.
That was followed up by the engineering computer science building late in the 90s. And again, we followed up on the interest in, it was a LEED oriented project. We were the first LEED gold large institutional building in the province. I think we actually got the second award. We were the first submission. Big atrium building, interest in natural light and views. The other thing I wanted to mention was the carry through and the the application of project architects' involvement in projects. So you can see the atrium here. The air handling was a big function, using the atrium as a common void for moving the air up and down and bringing natural light in. We also made allowance for passive solar collectors on top of the building. And again, some of the LEED credentials related to the views and the natural light through the atrium. Such a big building, we managed to keep the interior very pleasant because of those factors. The atrium face on the south, again, in these projects, as an architect and a project architect, you have to devote yourself to every detail and make sure that the carry through. The sunscreens in the south face were actually in a separate price, and there were arguments to take them out. And as project architect, we had to do everything we could to make sure that they were installed to control the light and the solar gain on the south face of the building. So there they are. And again, architects kind of work on the grand scheme of big ideas, but it's also the application of actually what gets built is so critical. Terry.
Moving on then to essentially stepping out of single building design, but looking then at what was a Thompson Berwick Pratt college at one, and then we were engaged to do campus planning here. But from the client came the suggestion that we should actually be now looking at energy efficient buildings, and this was started in 1990. This is the overall campus plan, Chris.
Yeah, and we did a series of buildings, probably about at least a dozen projects, including retrofits of the older buildings. We put new envelopes on these old wood-framed, wood-faced buildings from the 90s, energy efficient rain screen systems, upgraded windows. All the new buildings were kind of taken to the best performance available for of the time in terms of energy performance. And the site planning had a lot of concern about accessibility, and it was a sloping site. So we did a lot of site work orchestrating parking and pedestrian ways, water runoff, on it went. It was a great integrated project, and the individual buildings, I think, are again, long-term, they're still performing well.
Some of the interesting things we did here, and looking at, again, we were using quadruple glazing in 1990. We measured at one point the west-facing facade at 42 degrees centigrade on the outside of the glass. On the inside, because of the high-performing glazing, we were 21 degrees.
So we were really feeling our oats in terms of glazing standards and interest in glazing, and we were commissioned by BC Buildings Corporation to look at the prospects for reusing the old BC Electric building, which is a landmark historic modernist building in Victoria, designed by Thompson Berwick Pratt with Ned Pratt and Ron Tom. Initial project. It precedes the Vancouver BC Electric building. It was one of the first large curtain wall buildings in Western Canada. It's a masterpiece originally of kind of dealing with solar issues in the building. Large curtain wall faces shaded by a sunscreen system. So it was a landmark building in Western Canada for modernist design, just a few years after the Lever House in New York City. And we were aware of that architectural significance, but the building had to be updated. The curtain wall was failing. So we did intensive studies on options for the curtain wall. The client also was considering demolishing the building. So we were making the case to conserve the building and reuse it, which is a key component of sustainability. Terry? Oh, no, let's go. Oh, the curtain wall.
So you go.
Yeah, the curtain wall is, again, a high performance Conair 3, with actually a triple glaze system. We were able to reuse the sunscreens. We also introduced a seismic bracing system. viscous damper seismic bracing system, which is very innovative and only been used in California. I think it's one of the only examples in Canada. It's a very dynamic system. Again, we were conserving the old building structure. We were able to reuse the sunscreens. Thanks, Terry. 2 levels. And we studied the sunscreens with computer analysis. We found that the original design was incredibly effective, and it also was designed to bounce light, natural light, deep into the building. So we retained that. We could not use all the sunscreens, or a lot of damage, but we found that only 2 levels of sunscreens did the job quite well and retained the views. The glazing, we studied all sorts of issues with glazing for natural light transmission, heat gain, heat screening, and views out. And we got the best example of glazing for this particular condition. The building is highly efficient. It's going to have another 50 years. The client challenged us with life cycle analysis to justify the whole project. And we were able to demonstrate, if you look long enough, it all pays for itself very nicely. So from the large scale to the small, we did a little cottage project for our structural engineer, John Waite, and his wife, Judy. They were thinking of retiring out to a tiny Gulf island with no water supply, no power source. So we designed this off-the-grid little cottage for John and Judy. And it's a really good example of, we may all have to be off the grid in a climate change future. This thing was designed with a pyramidical roof that captured all the rain and stored it. The roof also shaded the building and gave an overhang. It was all built from a barge by hand. It has its own little generator, its own water collection systems. They had lived there, I think, individually for over a decade.
And then moving on to larger scale projects, and obviously this is Dockside Green. In this instance, the initial project came from the City of Victoria, but particularly from Kim Fowler. And I'm not sure if you know that she has written a book called Dockside Green, the story of the most sustainable development in the world, she says. This is a very comprehensive planning study, and it's ongoing. It's the first project in Canada that we know of that was a LEED Platinum, and it's proceeding in that level.
So I worked on the envelope detailing of phase 2, and this again is where architecture gets applied, and the project architect has to pursue every detail of the envelope enclosure and the insulation and the rain screen. We used a very sophisticated panel system, Swiss Pearl panel, which has a very long life, huge step ahead from hardy plank and so on. We were also able to insulate most of the exterior of the building. And the building also has a sunscreen system, which is rolls down from a chamber above the south and west windows. There was a phase 1 project was also done for sustainability. We made improvements on the sunscreen system in the building, and also the air handling. I think there was a lot of attention to the quality of the air handling, all achieving LEED Platinum standards for this project. So again, the project architect really had to watch every detail and pursue them.
And then moving on to a project that I was involved with in Palm Springs, which was the development of the West Valley campus for the College of the Desert. Involving here biomimicry, the box canyons of Palm Springs, and trying to interpret that for its long-term development. It's 160 acres. Of which 60 acres were assigned to photovoltaic energy generation. This was essentially to be a net zero project, and a long-term development for the West Valley campus.
Also, I think it may be a model for survivability with climate change. We may find that half of the southwest of the United States is a desert, and we may have to have completely sustainable planning conditions. The other element of sustainability and climate change is how we plan cities. And that's really one of the biggest gestures, involves planners and public administrators and architects. we have to make our cities more intensive and more sustainable, reuse more buildings, reuse the infrastructure, and yet still keep the cities vital and interesting. I'm very interested in the history of cities. That's part of sustainability too, keeping our identity and our range of heritage context as well as new buildings. So I think that balance is really important as cities move ahead. Survivability is going to be a big topic in climate change.
Yes, when it comes down to resiliency of single family dwellings to cities, I think that's going to be the issue.
I'm going to attempt to tell a little story about how I've learned over the years, over the last 20 years, how to try to lead and try to get more control, I guess, over the performance of our buildings. So it starts back in the late 90s with an assignment to pursue LEED Gold for the Vancouver Island Technology Park, which is an old long-term care hospital under the care of BC Buildings Corporation, who were just getting the religion at the time. And I believe this project started under LEED 1.0 with the US Green Building Council, and that's how it was certified originally. I point this out because I think we've moved on a long way from LEED. Obviously, there's still clients who are pursuing LEED. My critique of LEED is it doesn't go far enough with the pursuit of lower carbon, lower energy use in buildings. I note that even today, you get maximum points for only 50% below a baseline design, and I think we can do way better than that. So I've been involved in a few LEED projects. Another one, a notable one, when I was at Canon Design was I was a sustainability facilitator for a 23 firm team of consultants for this project. Again, it was a lot of it had to do with ticking boxes to get that LEED certification, notwithstanding the fact that I think there was some excellent integrated design outcomes, particularly in terms of carbon storage with the extensive use of wood and a very ecological approach to dealing with the vast amount of rainwater that came off the building. But moving on, I think, again, another LEED Silver project where I felt better able to lead integrated design teams and to kind of push the agenda a little harder rather than waiting for mechanical engineers to do energy modeling after the fact. So this was an example of pushing hard on building form to reduce, in this case, particularly cooling load on a large south-facing elevation. Just by angling it, we reduced the cooling load by about 18%, I think, on this project. But still waiting for that, for the tools and the expertise and in a way the permission to sort of take a better hold of the steering wheel of the project. And I think this is our, as architects, a unique and privileged position. You know, in the old days, it was the integrated design process. Now there are new formats for working together with multidisciplinary teams. But we still have to push the agenda. Here's an example of pushing hard on the mechanical engineers to develop a stack effect ventilation system. This is at Carsa at UVic, where the big climbing tower feature was used to drive a natural ventilation system from the outside into the center of the building. A luxury resort in the Okanagan, again, where a lobby feature that was desired by the client group, owners of Swarovski, was leveraged to really push a common area ventilation strategy that connected all of the hotel floors into this one large space that was tied into the mechanical system. So over the years, we've tried a lot of tools for evaluating the performance as early as possible in the design process, rather than waiting for milestone energy models from an energy modeler or from our mechanical consultant, Autodesk Green Building Studio, Safera as a plugin for SketchUp. I think both of those in our usage have been superseded by Design PH, which is a plugin for SketchUp, and also with Energos, which is a part of Vectorworks. Both of those yield, well, Energos is based on the Design PH, the PHPP, Passive House Planning Package from the Passive House Institute, and are both, it's cheaper and just as accessible as Safera, and provides some really useful output. So we're using these, we've been using these tools now probably for the last 10 or 12 years to try to get ahead of the rest of the team in terms of evaluating our architectural ideas for their performance outcomes. Here's an example. I have to put a little bit of eye candy into the presentation. Recently completed last year, I guess. Junior school for Glenlyon Norfolk School, built around a central learning commons, common area, double height, interconnected floor space that again is all about pushing, bringing in air, pulling air in from the outside walls, so that when someone in the classroom opens a window, there's actually a positive air movement from the outside in to the central core, which is again, this is tied into the central HRV system. So it's, again, it's been really good for the COVID era in terms of 24/7, 100% fresh air to all areas of the building, being leveraged by building form rather than just fan energy and ducts. This was a case where client was not particularly interested in hitting a target or getting any certification. We didn't have an extensive budget in the consultant budget for energy modeling, so we took control as we developed the massing. We were looking at it initially in Safera and then in Design PH to see how we were doing and to evaluate the effectiveness of shading devices, which you can see on the facade here, were used not just to provide passive shading, but also to tie in with the architecture of Rattenbury's old house, which is part of the campus. Some views of the interior. Now a project that was led by my partner, Paul Hammond, a 50-unit passive house apartment for BC Housing in Fort St. John. At one time, this was the largest passive house building in Canada. I'm glad to see that that's long been superseded. This was another, well, you can't do a passive house. I'm sure our other panelists will be talking about this too. You cannot do a passive house without understanding its performance as early as possible in the process. So this included a fairly extensive study of options and orientation of the building. Surprisingly enough, the conventional wisdom about orienting your buildings with a long direction in the east-west axis isn't borne out in multifamily housing, and the north-south actually works way better. There's the obligatory sustainability diagram about all the features. There's the building in use. This building at the last International Passive House Conference was awarded the air tightness award for, I think it's well, I'm not even going to quote the number. It was an absurdly low number for air tightness. And a lot of effort went into making that work, including extensive mock-ups and testing. In this case, the building sheathing actually provided the main air barrier with a lot of use of the latest air barrier tapes. Sun shading was tested in this case using IES virtual environment by our energy modeler, resulting in a kind of optimum, I guess, solution where it was only being put where it was needed. Now, we do a lot of work with BC Housing, and I'm pleased to see that BC Housing, among other institutions in the province, seems to be leading the way now in terms of achieving the highest possible performance for energy, for low embodied carbon, and for building in features that enhance resilience on multiple levels. So these are the sorts of things that they are now asking us to look at. We're actually involved in 2 pilot projects. One, a housing project for Tsleil-Waututh Nation in North Vancouver, where BC Housing is trialing this MBAR program. Some of you may have encountered it or be aware of it by now, but I think it's going to become a regular feature of projects for clients like BC Housing. This involves kind of whole team integrated assessment of risks for all the various climate outcomes that we're expecting. We are designing now for BC Housing using 2080 climate data. Essentially, again, with their focus on embodied carbon as well as operational carbon, looking at it in a holistic way. These are just some of the partners that are leading another project that we're involved in, the Reframed Initiative. We're pleased to have been selected as one of 6 teams working with Pembina Institute and BC Housing and the other partners on the Reframed Laboratory, where each team is looking at a different project in the portfolio of BC Housing and Metro Vancouver Housing for deep energy retrofits. And I think more than trying to design features into new buildings, a significant part of our business in the very near future is going to be involved in trying to take existing poorly performing buildings and bring them up to meet or exceed the current step code targets for new buildings. Pacific Institute for Climate Solutions is another organization at UVic that's involved in this sort of work, and they too are developing tools for evaluating some of these design measures that we're integrating in our work. So this is our project for the Reframed Lab. It's a rather tired old building used for supportive housing of at-risk, mostly Indigenous clientele. It has 2 parts, a 1963 motel and a 2002 addition. And in this project, we are not only looking at sort of holistic strategies for building in resilience into the building for at least the next 40 years, but also evaluating the cost benefits, cost and performance benefits of various approaches. So we have looked at 4 different bundles of upgrade measures for this project and compared them against 2 different baselines, both the existing building and a kind of business baseline B up in the top left represent some modest improvements that would basically bring it up to business as usual, so kind of current codes, and seeing how, so the exercise has been involved a lot of modeling of each of these bundles, a lot of comparisons, and some really interesting findings are coming out of it, particularly in the realm of diminishing returns for some of these measures. So you can see in both of these charts the very small differences both in consumption and carbon between our bundles 2, 3, and 4, but as you'll see, very significant cost differences over the lifespan of these projects. So this shows where these reframed projects are landing, somewhere around step code 2 for a new building, some, a little bit below in some cases, still a far way away from step 4 or passive house EnerFit for a retrofit, but still kind of blowing the lead energy scoring out of the water in terms of, if our baseline is 9% better than current performance, it doesn't take much to exceed the baseline for a lead project by, 73% rather than their top line 50%. Embodied carbon, really important. Choice of materials, really important. Huge amounts of embodied carbon in plastics such as EFIS. And I think this is really the bottom line is projects need life cycle costing to demonstrate their benefits. So there's like a 20-year payback on this project for a 40-year lifespan and a positive return on investment for the midline bundles that perform almost as well as the higher end ones. So thank you very much.
All right, well, thank you for having me here today. I'm coming to you from the traditional territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh, and now commonly known as Vancouver, although of course we practice in Victoria, Vancouver, and across Canada. In sharing that, for us, it's really important. We reflect upon our responsibilities in terms of recognizing that the active building, which we're all part of, is certainly central to the colonial violence and colonial impacts on these lands. And so for us, we can't separate these conversations, and it's important for us to sort of ground ourselves within them. So I'm going to talk more specifically about a single project and what that means and how it's framing, I think, an attitude or approach that we have for the future. And so we really are focused on or concerned about some of the big challenges. Climate crisis is obviously one of them, but there's a whole series of big crises right now that in our mind are intersectional and certainly cannot be thought of in isolation, whether it be the social inequities that we're starting to better understand, issues of reconciliation, income disparity, all sorts of homelessness. There's just so many issues, and we really take an approach that tries to address that, because we're asking ourselves this question: are we doing enough to impact change? And we've all seen these diagrams of the three-legged stool of sustainability, but most of what we've already talked about today and most of these conversations really focuses on the environmental aspect, and this is something that we're really committed to changing and sort of bringing a much more balanced approach to our design. So thinking simultaneously about environmental performance together with certainly social performance and the economic aspects as well. And we're really inspired by the economist Kate Raworth, her donut economics work, which I will here really dramatically oversimplify. Is a really, I think, good representation of our beliefs. And I really encourage you to buy the book, read it. and then lend it to someone else. But if our goal, really what she's saying is that if our goal is to create a safe and just space for humanity, that sort of blue donut, which I believe we're all here talking about, is that we need to simultaneously be paying attention to not only the ecological carrying capacity of the planet, which is quite clearly critical, and but we also need to be paying attention to the social foundation that underpins that safe space. And so for us, we're trying to, again, look at the intersectional aspects of this and be simultaneously pushing for higher and higher levels of ecological performance, as well as social performance simultaneously. We just simply don't believe you can separate those two. And so a recent project we completed in Surrey, the Clayton Community Center, I think is a project I can use to demonstrate what that means and how we're putting that into practice. So there's really two key themes or threads that I want to talk about here. And that is, there's a really important passive house story here. This is a community building that's passive house certified, which is a really not an easy feat, believe me. But that's part of the story. And the other part of the story is the application of our emerging framework for being intentional around social impact, our social impact framework. And so I'm going to talk about how that impacted our design process and the results of this project. Now, just a little bit about the project. It's a integration of arts, library, and recreation services. And the desire was to have something that wasn't co-locational, but was really deeply integrated, boundaryless within the project. And so from a formal standpoint, it wasn't about separate arms of tentacles. It was really about bringing together, which suited an approach to passive house really well. Clayton is a sub area of Surrey, in a very dense sort of contemporary suburban context. Stacked row houses, very dense, very little public space. The site was a former elementary school, treed site, and giving you a sense of just how populated this area is, how many kids there are. On either side of the site were public secondary schools. There's just so many people in this area. And so we looked at the site. We started by understanding the natural movement patterns. We did not want to cut down any trees that hadn't already been removed. So we really worked with the clearings that were there and positioned the building within the sort of circulation and movement patterns that already existed within the neighborhood. And then our architectural strategy was to try to extend and reestablish and use the forest as a metaphor for coming together and explore the characteristics of a forest in the building. So here you see the ground floor plan, which the color coding represents the three different uses, and then the primary social spaces in the middle, and really without boundaries and a high level of interconnectivity and flexibility between uses. In the center of this was this place we called the Commons, inspired by the town square. It's really this open to all space that was without specific programming, and this repeated on both floors. And that common space for us became a physical recreation, I guess, or at least we were inspired by the notion of the clearing in the forest and the qualities of that space where you're within, the spatial conditions and the light conditions and how good it feels to be in those types of spaces. And so that's really what we were striving to achieve. And then, starting from that point, we abstracted the notion of the forest, the trunks, and the sort of collection of trees that became more than a single tree. It became this whole element that was elevated above the ground plane. And that really became the driver and the sort of the party of this project. The upper floor followed that same pattern, primarily the library, but also recreation and arts spaces as well. So here you see the building in its context. It was a bit of a victim of the pandemic. It was finished early in the pandemic, and so really didn't see operational until quite recently, but we're really pleased with how the community is now starting to discover the building and utilize it. as well. And there's lots of architectural stories I could tell here about how we planned, or the structural system, or the technical aspects of how we achieve passive house. But it's more than I can cover in the time that we have. But so I really want to focus on our design process and what that meant for us. And passive house, and I think the industry's starting to understand the importance of things like passive house. We're huge believers in passive house, because for us it's the gateway to so many other objectives. Creating tight envelopes that are ultra low energy makes it so much easier to be net zero. It encourages a way of thinking and an accountability that is really valuable in the process. But we have to understand the usage at such a different level. We start with understanding the users and the tenants, really understanding who's going to be in that building, looking at it in really detailed at the occupancy schedule in a building that will ultimately be heated by its occupants. You need to understand how many people are going to be there. You need to understand how many things are going to be plugged into the wall. The level of detail, the level of understanding that we need to bring to this building's operation is a completely different way of designing, and at a completely different stage of the design process to conventional ways of working. So once we understand and start building upon an understanding of the use and the tenants, then we're looking at what are the passive strategies. How can we orient these things to maximize the benefit and be logical in terms of like which elements require more heating or cooling, or what are the symbiotic relationships that are possible between the spaces. And so we start looking at each individual program block and understanding its characteristics. Is it going to produce heat? Is it going to require heat, etc.? Does it benefit from the sun? Does it not benefit from the sun? And that really became a key driver of this three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle about what went where in this project. And so with a passive house approach, you're creating a balance, and you're minimizing your energy use in a lot of different ways. But certainly, if you can balance your heating and cooling, if you can offset those, you're really helping to drive those energy costs down. And I'm dramatically oversimplifying, but we look at, and sometimes, much like Chris referred to in sort of the counterintuitivity, or at least challenging some of the things we thought we knew about conventional sustainability thinking, more insulation isn't always better. Sometimes less is better, and you have to actually study each application and each orientation and each surface individually to understand actually where you might tuning the building to more or less heating loss. So, we look at different envelope approaches. This is not that unusual to some of the other things that we've been hearing about or doing, but the same process, and you're driving down that cooling demand as much as possible, and of course watching the heating demand as well. And then once you think you're getting someplace with the envelope, we start integrating notions of shading and what how can we reduce the heat gain, reducing the need for cooling, and so on as a result. And that act then starts helping the system as well. Big breakthrough on a building like this is when we start looking at ventilation and losses from ventilation and looking at natural ventilation. And this is where we really start seeing the energy performance of this building come down into that passive house zone. And so, and it's interesting to reflect. For us, the West Vancouver Community Centre was a really important project, LEED Gold, now about 12 years old. It was LEED Gold with geothermal and all the really what was then state-of-the-art environmental processes and procedures. And the energy performance now is we're less than a third of what that was then. And so it's just interesting to and reinforce how critical it is for us to continue to push for higher and higher levels of energy performance, And in fact, we need to go much, much further as well. But for us, Passive House is a key strategy. It's not easy in North America in public buildings, but it is absolutely something we need to push the industry forward. So the other thread is the social impact framework, where we're being intentional about social performance, social goal setting. There's lots to this as well. It's based on a series of principles that we explore with the client and set goals. This is where at the beginning of the project, we're setting those goals. It involves deeper commitment and strategy to public engagement, taking that engagement to the people in different ways. So there's many aspects to this, and participatory design as well, where we're involving the community and staff in ways to really understand, and again, connecting to, this is one of those threads that intersects so importantly with Passive House as well, is that really understanding the 24-hour cycle of these buildings and how are they going to be used and how should they be used. As well, we also look at governance, because if you don't actually understand how decisions are going to be made, and particularly in these complex arrangements where you're bringing different groups together, how you're going to make decisions and who's going to how you're all going to be accountable to the project requires a lot of effort. And so in this project, we also redesigned the governance system for the organizations. And then ultimately, it's also a whole series of embedded design strategies that look at social performance, and how do we encourage higher levels of sociability? How do we encourage tolerance? How do we encourage inclusion? There's all sorts of physical design strategies that are embedded in our framework as well. And ultimately, the last part of this for us is the need to go back to our buildings and actually study them, see how they're performing, fine tune them, and feed that back into not only into this building but into future buildings as well. We believe that our industry does not do near enough in terms of post-occupancy evaluation and helping both those buildings and future buildings be higher performance, and that's as true for environmental performance as it is for social performance as well. And I think maybe I will leave it there.
One of the things that the previous speakers alluded to, I want to speak to directly, and this is our role in what resilience means. And I want to point out that while we as architects like to talk about our buildings and talk about our work, really what we're doing is we're empowering our clients, who are people. Many people in today's day and age want to do the right things. They don't know exactly what that means or how to go about that, but our job is to empower them. We're a young firm. I came from the East Coast in the early 2000s and interned under Larry McFarland, for any of those people who might know him, and so worked on early lead projects, and the first platinum building actually, that's a Gulf Islands research center that's just up in the Sandwich Peninsula. And so, as Chris alluded to, once you start getting into lead, you realize that this can't be the end goal. And I'll use a sports analogy, which is like, you can play to not lose, but that's different than playing to win. And so when I think about the way that our building industry has been trying to adapt over the last few years, it still feels like everyone's just playing to not lose here. Oops, go back. So what is resilience? Resilience needs to be focused on people. This is all about people being able to live and work for in perpetuity. And so our buildings need to be more sustainable in order to enable this human resilience. This isn't just about making good buildings, it's about enabling humans to live onward into the future. And so our industry is just one tool of many that human beings will use to enable their own resilience. And so in this context, we ask how our buildings can help with this. So first, of course, is to not create more problems than we need to. And when I think about what the Green Building Council had started with is by saying we can just bring the bottom up and raise this bar a little bit by, okay, let's reduce our waste, let's reduce our pollution, let's try and reduce our carbon footprint. And these are good objectives. But then again, when we think about how to win, we need to make things better. So we want to find ways to get people to reconnect with their local environments. We need our buildings to work within and actually contribute to our ecosystems. And so this is not about mitigating disaster here. This is actually about how to improve the world around us within our building industry. So the first thing we want to do is just start simple. This project that I'm showing here is, I think, one of the first 2 passive house office buildings in North America. And when we started this project, we found an ownership group that wanted an efficient building. They wanted a durable building. They wanted a building that would endure the changes that goes through their industry. And so passive house, we pointed out to them, is just the standard. And our firm does all of our buildings passive house. We don't look beyond that. We just don't see there's a reason not to do passive house. We can do it in all our buildings, and so why not? The other really interesting thing about resilience has to do with universal access and accessibility. And one of the things that became really important in this building is that one of the owners had suffered a tragic accident and is quadriplegic. And what we realized is that any one of us could go through these kind of life-altering changes where we have to then adapt to the world around us rather than having all of our facilities allow for us to go through these life changes. We're forcing people to work within a building system that's just not made for them. And so one of the things that we realized right away is that resilient buildings are actually buildings that allow for the adaptability of people and our lifespans, and not only our lifespans, but the lifespans of our entities that include multi-generationals, working lives of many people. So when we looked at this building, we recognized that a simple structure that allowed for malleability and adaptability, that was accessible to everybody in it through various parts of their lives, from either being a young, fit, able person to maybe a young family of mother or father to a senior citizen, maybe someone who has mobility issues or visual impairments, and allowing the building to be ready for them to make that happen. The owner wanted to have, this durable, efficient, low carbon building that would be adaptable for their growing company. So we achieved this through mass timber structures, simplified mechanical and envelope systems that would achieve passive house certification. These simple, durable materials and multi-use spaces were integrated to create, like I say, it's a simple building, but it works really, really well. We also adapted to the construction needs, recognizing that not all of the construction trades even know what passive house is, let alone are able to complete this. So we developed a strategy that would separate certain parts of the construction so that all of the structural systems were done in one phase in one plane, and would leave a clean, plain working arrangement for everybody that's coming in after the fact to do with the envelope and the air tightness. And then again, after that, that was all closed up and finished off, and then we would be able to come in within that and work on the mechanical systems as well as to put the final cladding on the building, which meant that we minimized the amount of overlap and one trade poking a hole through another trade's membrane, although that still happened. But we recognized that that was a fundamental part of creating a building that would allow our current environment to create something that would be a more lasting and resilient piece of architecture for the future. We then realized that passive house, as great as it is still only just playing to not lose. We want to win. And by that, we recognize that we have to go beyond. And when people talk about net zero buildings, we ask, why stop at net zero? The next building we did is net positive. And we want all our buildings now to be net positive. We want them to be net positive in their energy consumption. We want them to be net positive in their impact on the environment, in terms of water use, in terms of their impact in the local soils and wildlife integration. This house, and again, I want to illustrate that this is not about us as architects and celebrating our own good buildings. This is about enabling people who want to do this and showing that, yes, you can. You have a budget, you have a timeline, we have a way that we can help you achieve your goals within architecture. It's the tool that we use. This Gabion house is for a couple. One of the man is visually impaired, and so uh, they have specific needs that relate to that. But they also wanted to live here forever, and we all joked about how they're going to be running around in their wheelchairs. This photo is me after I broke my ankle, and then had to hobble around. And so again, I'm fit, I'm able, and yet still I need a fully accessible building sometimes, and realizing that accessibility is one of those things that provides resilience to people as an important part of what we need to do moving forward. So this building used Passive House as an energy target, as a indoor air quality target. We used these design guides to create the systems for this. We used a post-disaster structural system in a house. I'm not sure if any of you have done that before, but it's a pretty big deal. We then looked at the living building challenge as a more holistic umbrella to look at how this building is going to incorporate into the local environment. And of course, all of this is under the envelope of an accessible building that will be adaptable over not just the lifespans of the two owners, but their kids and their grandkids and their great grandkids that will have this house for generations to come. So the Gabion house draws its shape and its form and placement within its landscape. And as many of you know, there's like these wonderful little pockets of these Garry Oak landscapes around the Saanich Peninsula. And so this was one of them where we had all these really cool rock outcrops and these Garry Oak trees and all the within that, you get these microclimates where you have these little shade areas that would have all the ferns and things. Then you have these hot arid areas where you have different types of plants and flowers, not to mention the birds and all the bugs and the creepy crawly things that are living all around. And all of this is living in unison in this one area. And we're about to come through and plow it down and put something there. So what we want to do is ease our building into the landscape, rather than sort of claim all the space. We want to find space that'll allow us to work within this. So the house pivots around a central tree that is growing off the edge of a rock. One of the most beautiful features of this house that we found. And we use that as a shade element, as well as sort of a social feature, as well as a play feature for the grandkids in the time being. Every time I go there, you walk up and you put your arm around the great big branch because it comes right off the deck and it's part of the building. This building started construction just as COVID hit. So as you can imagine, it's now hugely delayed, way over budget. It's had all the problems that you can think of that came with the COVID crisis. And our owners have been very patiently working their way through that with their builders. The house slopes from north to south through these undulating rocks and treed areas and grass areas. The entire building is, if you're familiar with living building projects, you know that all of the water features have to be contained on site. So you draw your water from the site, you collect all your rainwater, you dispose of all your effluents on site. Everything's treated on site. So all of that had to be dealt with. So of course we had to dig up the site in order to make that happen and then put it all back together again. But the landscape design became a key component of the design of this whole building, where we were working with different aspects of the smallest local environments, from little ponds to sunny, arid areas that would create important parts of the design of the building, from the way that you move through the building, the way that you can find food on your local site, the way that you deal with water on your local site. And of course, all of this with the fun little added benefit of working with someone who's visually impaired, who notices the way that the birds sound and the way that the wind rustles, and all of these acoustic features of not just the building, but of the entire site became a key component of this. And reconnecting people to their environment that way was a treat for us as designers, because we end up working with our design consultants, with our engineers, with the owners themselves on site to find the most applicable things within this actual site that can affect our building. So the rock outcroppings, of course, they're going up and down and up and down. Some of them had to be blasted away in order to get our foundations to work. And of course, when we talk about post-disaster structural systems, one of the things that becomes a really important feature is that we have to like hold fast to that rock. And so when we move some of the rock away, we realize that we have all these little rocks in pieces. And we wanted to use those rocks as a cladding feature, as well as an interior finishing feature, as well as a landscape feature. So this is where the gabions came from. So we have these wonderful gabion walls that are the cladding on the building that then extend out past the building. And in this case here, where the wall's not finished. The picture you can see on the left is just the first half of the wall that's going to continue to march westward across the entire site, that can create gates, small gardens, entryways, as well as other features of the site for the owners. The other wonderful thing about all of these rocks that are moving up and down is that whenever you put something in the way, water has to move differently. So we looked a lot about the way that water moves on the site through the rainfalls that are there. And there's these lush wet areas that then become very dry in other spaces. We realized that we're creating these little ponding areas if we put a house in particular locations. So rather than try and fight that, we wanted to celebrate that. And so in fact, you enter this house by coming to the top of a rock outcropping and then crossing a bridge over a pond into the front door. This pond then is used to its overflow into the garden areas, and then down further through the site into the swales that are affected by that's how it treats with its rainwater. The other wonderful thing about rainwater too is the sound it makes. And again, we wanted to play with a lot of these features for the owners so that, when it's raining, it's not just wet. There's something happening on the site. And we as people can appreciate that and interact with it. In this case here, we're talking about sound and splashes. So splashes visually as well as acoustically. And so these features happen a couple different spots around the house. So in the morning time, there's a garden on the east that the roof has been cut away so that we can see the water fall into this little breakfast garden. The entryway, which we're looking at here, has a water feature that splashes into the entry pond over which the bridge accesses the building. In the afternoons, there's water features that address the way that the house cantilevers out over the rocks and is suspended by these chains, of course, from the roof. This allowed the homeowners to be reconnected to their environment, which again was one of the key things. And so the accessible pathways that go through the building allowed people to kind of move through the building in many different ways, and then all the way through the house. And so the rooms in the house are in fact just rooms on the site, and the materials that are on the house become materials on the site become materials in the house. And we wanted to create this integration, this complete integration of the entire site.
Just a kind of 30-second warning.
Perfect. Yeah. So again, I wanted to bring a couple points that I hope we can start to talk about in the round table to come. And so some of the challenges that we found here is that, like, even in a house, once we start to look at what resilience actually means, we realize that there's a complexity here that goes beyond our traditional siloed design systems. And so there's the coordination that's required to bring these new approaches into our building industry. Not only that, but there's a realignment of values that have to happen. And you know that any of the architects that you're going to speak to, certainly the ones in the roundtable today, but people who have tried to get these types of projects going, realize that this is not just about building a building and then adding a layer of passive house to it, or adding a layer of LEED Gold to the back end, or maybe I'm going to add a layer of carbon neutrality to my already existing design. We have to realign our values so that these become key components of the design from the start. So, in order to empower the future and our clients moving forward, it's really important to remove these silos. We find now that we don't go into design development without a builder team. So we do our schematic design, and then when we're talking about bringing in our structural engineers and our mechanical engineers, we're already talking about bringing in our sub-trades, our general contractors, because the coordination that's required for all these parties to work together needs to happen early and often in order to actually tackle a construction process in an efficient way. And so removing those silos is important. The collaboration is really important. And again, recalibrating the values so that you realize that all of these big ideas are actually key components of the design and not layered on afterwards.
Great. Thanks, Phil. That's a very appropriate way to end. I think it sets us up for some good conversations. And thanks again to all the presenters, Terry, Chris, Will, Daryl. I think there's a lot to talk about. And for me, there's a lot of commonalities between, how we all talk about, sustainability, climate change, resilience, the intersectionality of all of these things that we're all trying to do things better. And I'm wondering, maybe a good place to start, and kind of playing off how Will finished his presentation is identifying maybe for each of you what you think the biggest challenge is in terms of us moving design forward, but also what the biggest opportunity is. And we could, I don't know if anybody wants to take it on first.
Clients are the biggest challenge. Clients who aren't ready as we are, I guess, or as knowledgeable as we are about the importance of what we're trying to do and the need to do it. I mean, as I tried to say, that I'm very pleased that institutional clients like BC Housing, Metro Vancouver, the City of Vancouver, that they are all getting beyond the reusable bag approach, I guess, to sustainable design and compelling it as policy, I think. And still a lot of our clients aren't there yet, and they see it still as an expense. And that just goes to the importance of architects not being passive about the cost benefits of what it is we're doing. There are very good, not just economic, but as Daryl said, sort of holistically complete, responsible arguments for doing what we're doing. And as long as clients can be persuaded to take a long view and shown the evidence of it, then there's a chance, I think.
I wanted to add too, though, that there's an interesting development that's happening, and Daryl, you could probably speak to this more just because you're in Vancouver, but the fact that commercial buildings are now going, I think there's a date a couple years in the future that they're going to have to actually make public their energy consumption. That we as architects have to point out that the design work that we're doing is going to directly impact their publicly available information related to their energy consumption, which means that if a building owner were to come to us and say, give me an office building, and we can demonstrate to them that there's a substantial risk that they're going to be in a negative position in a few years down the road when they're going to be acknowledging publicly that they're far less efficient than the building next to them and are going to have to try and find rents that are going to compete with that building next to them, that the design decisions that we're making for them right now are actually inherently part of their long-term value. Conversely, we could look back to what happened in the 90s and say, we as architects can't design you a leaky building just because it's cheaper. Like that's just not professional. Like we can't do that for you. And so if you're asking us to design a building that's going to meet minimum code standards of 2018, we can say to you, this is a bad idea. This is a bad idea for so many reasons, not only because we can do better, but also because you're going to put yourself in a position that you're going to be compromised a few years down the road. And in a few years, your building's going to be outdated. It's going to be unsustainable. And it's going to be, on the back end of the market that's going to be available to your clientele.
There's so much, when you think about what's our biggest challenge and trying to sum that up into one phrase, I mean, I think we could probably, each of us could talk for an hour about the challenges, and they're all big. And so maybe we'll take a different approach. And I agree, clients need to be better. And I think we need accountability structures. But I guess I also don't want to let us off the hook in terms of our role. I think architects need to be better. You know, we know how to do better work. Like, it's not like we're waiting for a technology to be invented. It's there. We know exactly what needs to be done, but we're not doing it consistently enough. And I think I don't think we're, as a profession, acting like it's an emergency. I think that we too often have accepted barriers as, or seen barriers as in immovable objects. I don't think we exercise our voice enough on advocacy. Anyways, I could go on and on, but I think that we have to be better, and we have to, you know, building codes are the worst we can do, you know, and if we think about our social contract with the public, and if we're, you know, 10 years down the road looking at even more deterioration in our society due to the climate crisis, I don't think anybody's going to be saying, you know, you architects, you built these buildings, you know, and said, well, our clients, or, you know, there was red tape, or, you know, I think the public expects more from us, and I think we need to act like it's an emergency more often than we do. And I know that's really simplistic, and it's easier said than done, but I just believe it. I just think we need to act with more urgency than we have.
I'll just add to that in that architects aren't going to solve climate change on our own, or in any case, it is just a sweeping, big prospect, and daunting one. But what you do is significant. So the projects that we did way back, where we made sure we had good envelope performance, there's unpredictability in climate change. Who knows what the impact of humidity, relative humidity changes, and heat domes, and extreme colds and rain are going to do to building envelopes in existing buildings. We could have major problems with so many of our existing buildings, but the buildings we took care with producing good envelope systems and so on, they're going to produce the best. So there's significance to what we do, and we make a real contribution. We have to be able to figure out how to do more, though, because we have to have a collective social whole committed to this topic. Now, architects, I think, can also give really good examples. All the projects I saw today had the factor of what I call design. You took the issues, you took the challenges, you took the the initiatives, and you integrated it somehow into something that had a visual and physical presence as well as performing. And that's a feature of architecture. And again, the public can look to us and respect that. It becomes a good engine to help pull the train along. And I think that's one of the skills that our profession obviously has from what I've seen today.
And I'll just bring it back a little bit to Andy's question about what are the significant challenges are. And I think that both to to the comments previously as well, that when we think about the amount of design work that we're used to doing and the way that we're used to designing, I think that one of the things we have found in our projects is that we need to think past what the architect's role is and think about how it is that we're creating a building for these people. So it includes the builders, the subtrades, it includes the engineers, it includes the city planners, it includes the neighbors, it includes all of these people. I mean, Daryl did a lot about, how he likes to bring all these people into the design process. And I think one of the things that's really key about that is that in order to get past like me, my idea, my building into us, our building, our society, we need to think far bigger than what the architect's role usually is. And when our firm is small, we don't do a lot of large projects. So but even still, the projects that we're working with, we realize that we have to work with all of our builders and our subtrades way earlier than we've ever expected. Like, I've never experienced working with sub-trades in a design development process, let alone prior to tendering. In fact, we don't even tender anything anymore. This is a terrible way to find builders. But we find that we have to work with the construction industry early and often, as well as with our engineers, as well as with the clients, as well as with the city. And it's with that collaboration, it seems to be the only way that we're going to be able to get the buildings to this level of integration in a holistic design approach that's going to come to meet the resilience goals that we have.
I'm prompted by this conversation to think about, what is the problem? Is it about, it's not about building technology. We have the technology. Is it about the desire of the client? And it really becomes down to a question of values, from one perspective, and the kind of intersection of that social realm, or in terms of economics, right? Why isn't sustainability more, valuable? And I wonder if you have any thoughts, if any of you would have any thoughts in terms of the value of sustainability, and like, is it within our realm to interact with that in terms of elevating the value of sustainability to our clients or to society, and how we might go about doing that?
I'd like to start, if you don't mind. One of the things that we come across often is that, well, and admittedly, people come to our firm because they share sustainable goals. That's one thing that our firm does really well. And so we all pick our clients in one way or another, but the clients that come to us and the ones that we choose to work with are ones that share sustainability goals, and whether it's single family homes, or whether it's a public entity, or whether it's a commercial project. The thing that we've come to realize, though, is people all have budgets, as all of us realize. Some clients value the budget paramount, but I don't think anybody has clients that budget isn't a concern. And one of the things that we realize is that when people say, can I build a house for $1 million? We'll say yes. Say, can I build a passive house for $1 million? The answer is still yes. It's not $1 million plus 100,000. It's a yes, you can build a passive house for. Can I build a living building passive house for $1 million? Yes. The difference, though, is that if you have the same budget and you change your goals, it's not like some of the goals don't fit. It's that the building has to change and the design process has to change to incorporate that. So if you know that you're trying to build a house for $1 million and then want to add all these layers on top of it, you're talking about added costs and added expense and added design features later. But if you start with those goals and you know that you have $1 million and the house has to be a living building passive house, then that's where you start from. And the building, maybe it's not so large. Maybe it doesn't have granite countertops or gilded lilies in the bathroom, but other features change, and where you allocate the finances within the building project go in different directions. And if people are on board with that to begin with, then projects can happen within any budget.
I think that goes for any scale of project. The architect needs to be fully engaged with the costs and the benefits and the return on investment that their clients are going to get. Like that, the reframe project that I presented, we proved that business as usual, although it was cheaper, had a negative rate of return on it. As soon as you do the life cycle analysis and you include things like, the carbon taxes that you're going to be paying over the next 40 years and so forth, it very quickly becomes apparent that it makes sense to go to the bank and get another $1.3 million and start making money from your project instead of losing money. To sum up what I was trying to do with the theme of my presentation is, as architects, we can't just, it's not just design that we have to be engaged with. We have to be engaged with the data that our design, that drives our design, that comes out of our design choices, and be able to analyze it correctly and present it in the best possible light to make the argument. I think, that's the only way we're going to, we can't all go on strike or turn clients away, but they're more often than not willing to be convinced. They're not going to reject sustainability if there's a good business case for it.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I think, this notion of values and value is a fun, for me, a really fundamental exercise, right? There's clients that are going to be driven by values, and we love those clients. But that's not, we don't love clients that are driven by value. You know, to Chris's point, one of the best things the best tools we have is actually understanding public policy, understanding the impact of carbon tax and the cost of carbon, what that's going to mean over the next number of years. Clients become quite motivated, particularly institutional clients or owner operators, when they're confronted with the data on what it's going to cost to operate their buildings. And frankly, if they're not motivated by that, and if they're not motivated by values, then why are we working for them? You know, are we operating in the public interest to work for a client that is completely disregards any either value or values? Like, you know, if we all said no, would they change? Possibly, you know, but life's short. We all have so much work in us. I think we need to be willing to say no to clients as well. You know, we clearly need to try to work with and move along clients, but there's a certain point where you just have to say no as well.
I'd respond to a couple of those issues as well. Will made the comment earlier on about that we need to play to win. And I've always suggested that if we're going to win, we must play to our strengths, not our weaknesses. But our playing field in this instance, we live in North America's most extreme seismic zone. We're becoming more aware of the implications of climate change, heat domes causing catastrophic fires, and in the winter months, extreme and devastating flooding. Rising sea levels are inevitable. We need to recognize that these issues are real and that we are capable of preparing for them. We need to plan, prepare, and in doing so, become resilient. And I think that's the message that we have to, as a profession, we have to wave that flag. It's a daunting, if we ignore the issues that are coming up, we're in deep trouble. If we can accept and work with those circumstances that are, as I say, I think, in my opinion at least, are inevitable, then we're going to make some progress.
I'd like to just add to that, you know, to Daryl's point before, that, you know, architects need to do better. I think that, you know, if we start designing buildings to code minimum, we're going to be liable for the detrimental effects that they cause, whether our clients ask specifically for something better or not. Like, we know how to do better. The fact that we don't, I think, is a failing. So I think that we can and that we must.
I agree.
We're mandated, our mandate says we're to operate, perform, practice to the public interest.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it's a viable public interest argument to say that the code minimum is the standard to which we should design.
No.
We're well aware of the problems. Clearly, it's a public interest for us to respond to them.
Would it
we
be
need to be held? We need to be held to a higher
to
standard. Sorry, Andy.
No, I just really, like, could we turn that around and say, why isn't the code minimum what we should be working towards? Like, why isn't the code minimum here rather than
the code
here?
minimum is moving up,
And
right?
it is.
The step code was, you know, I think its rate of adoption is too slow. And I think we're going to, you know, as people in governments at all levels of government realize how urgent the crisis is, laws are just going to get tougher and codes are going to get harder, faster, I think. And
do we have a collective responsibility to push that? As
I believe
of course we do.
Yeah.
Of course we do. Yeah.
Not only that, pardon me, I was just going to say, not only we have to, like, push the building safeties and services branch to improve that, but I recognize that that part of the government has many different impacts on it. We as an architecture, as a collective of professionals, is much simpler to just raise the bar. In fact, there's the measure, forgive me, I can't remember how this is worded, but what a common professional of equal date and standard would do. There's that level of professional diligence. That level of professional diligence is already higher. There's lots of people who know how to do passive house buildings and LEED platinum buildings and living buildings. That bar is already set high. So ask yourself, if you're not doing that, are you actually doing your job? That measure is already being set. It's not just a bunch of us that are here on the table. There's plenty of people in the audience who know how to design these buildings. And in fact, could probably design some better than we can. And so when we think about the collective level of professional design capability, why would we ever design something that's less than that? That is not doing our job.
So climate change, I think, has a strong hand of destiny coming at us, and virtue will be rewarded very quickly, I think, with some of the challenges of climate change. So if you've done good work, it's going to be vindicated. If you haven't, as people are saying, people are going to be looking askew at it. So we have a really big rolling towards us with all the challenges of climate change, and very quickly, there's going to be a spectrum of performance that's going to be brought before us all. Society is going to be tuned to that.
Well, I'd say we're collectively screwed unless we have collective rules to meet better targets at the highest level, right? We have to get beyond that it's a voluntary thing, that everybody's individually responsible for making this a better planet by using the reusable bag or buying an electric car. I mean, that's just a panacea. That's not a panacea, that's a sop. It's to make people feel good, but it will not affect climate change in any positive way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite concerned about the ability of the profession to adapt. The systems that govern us, the codes, for those that have been involved in changing codes, it takes years, right? We don't have years. And so while we need to push the codes, and we should be advocates, we should all be writing letters to those that are responsible for them and asking for more stringent codes, demanding more stringent codes, but we can't wait until there's that round of code modification that's come through that's going to hold us accountable. We have to find another way to be accountable beyond the codes, or we just simply don't have time. And that's where I think gets back to my earlier point, that if we were truly treating this like an emergency, we wouldn't wait for the codes to tell us what to do. We would do what we know needs to be done and know what to do, and we would be treating it like an emergency. And that's why we cannot always look to others for accountability. We have to also include us in that group of people that we're pointing at when it comes to what needs to change.